Imagine, right, that you are an active duty police sergeant.
Okay.
You have a pension, rock-solid professional reputation, and a community that just implicitly trusts your judgment.
Right, you have a lot to lose.
Exactly. You are literally trained to observe facts, report reality, and just ignore the noise.
Yeah.
So what exactly would you have to see in the woods to make you willingly walk back into your precinct, sit down at your desk, and file a permanent official report stating that you just looked up into the broad daylight and saw a 12-foot prehistoric pterodactyl soaring over the tree line?
I mean, that's career suicide.
It really is. But welcome to the Bridgewater Triangle. You may not be familiar with isolated ghost towns or maybe a specific stretch of highway known as a UFO hotspot.
Yeah.
But what if there was one place that had absolutely everything, like every single category of the unexplained, crammed into just 200 square miles?
Yeah, and that's what makes this so difficult to study. It challenges the very foundation of how we categorize anomalies, because usually we compartmentalize, right? Cryptozoologists study cryptids, ufologists look at the sky, parapsychologists look for hauntings. But the geographic area we are looking at today, it just forces a total collapse of all those disciplines.
Because it's all happening at once.
Exactly. The phenomena reported here are so incredibly well documented that they demand we look past the individual ghost story. We have to analyze the structural integrity of the environment itself.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We are pulling heavily from the investigative text, The Bridgewater Triangle, America's most concentrated paranormal zone.
It's a fantastic resource.
It really is. We are going to systematically unpack the geography, the dark historical bedrock, and just the sheer overlapping density of these phenomena in southeastern Massachusetts. We really want to understand how and why this specific landscape acts as an engine for high strangeness.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this because we first need to understand the physical borders of the trap we're walking into, essentially. The Bridgewater Triangle is anchored by 3 distinct towns. You have Abington acting as the northern point, Freetown holding down the south, and Rehoboth pushing out to the west. And caught inside those boundary lines are roughly 200 square miles of incredibly dense swampland, sprawling state forests, and colonial-era settlements that date back to the very birth of America.
And a crucial distinction to make right at the outset here is our analytical approach. We aren't just telling scary stories. We are looking for patterns across multi-decade, multi-witness accounts.
Right, that's the key.
The significance of the Bridgewater Triangle to modern research isn't just a collection of campfire tales. It is the sustained, geographically concentrated expression of impossible events witnessed by highly credible individuals. I mean, we are analyzing a system here.
I think that approach is going to be vital for you listening right now, because whether you approach these topics as a hardened skeptic looking for, psychological explanations, or a true believer who feels reality is far stranger than science admits, this place is the ultimate puzzle box.
It really has something for everyone.
It does. The sheer volume of reports from law enforcement, from seasoned trackers, from people with absolutely everything to lose by sounding crazy, it means we can't just brush this off.
No, you can't ignore the data.
But before we go chasing lights in the sky or monsters in the brush, we have to dig into the dirt itself. The strangeness of this 200 square mile zone didn't magically activate in the 1970s when someone finally drew a triangle on a map.
Right, the 70 wave is just the modern context.
Exactly. This is tied directly to the ancient, deeply scarred history of the land.
The historical footprint is paramount. You simply cannot separate the modern anomalies of the triangle from the cultural and historical reality of the ground they manifest on. And the beating heart of this entire landscape, geographically and spiritually, is a place called Hockomock Swamp.
Just the name Hockomock sounds heavy.
It is. This is an imposing 16,000-acre wetland. It is the largest freshwater swamp in Massachusetts, and the terrain is notoriously punishing. I mean, it's brutal.
16,000 acres. To put that in perspective, that is a staggering amount of impenetrable, hostile wilderness surrounded by modern highways and suburbs. And for thousands of years before European boots ever touched this soil, the Wampanoag people inhabited this region.
Yes.
And their understanding of this specific massive swamp was profound and very clear. They called it Hockomock, which in their language translates directly to the place where spirits dwell.
Which tells you a lot right there.
Right. This wasn't categorized as prime hunting real estate or an ideal place to build a summer camp. They recognized it as a highly charged spiritual battery, a place of deep reverence, and fundamentally, a place of extreme danger.
The contrast with the European settlers who arrived centuries later is quite telling, actually, because the colonists encountered this exact same 16,000-acre expanse. But they had completely different religious frameworks, right?
Right.
A completely different relationship to nature, and they spoke a completely different language. Yet, upon experiencing the overwhelming oppressive nature of that specific terrain, their naming convention arrived at an almost identical conclusion regarding its hostility.
Yeah, what did they call it?
They bluntly labeled it Devil's Swamp.
Devil's Swamp.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a rare moment of complete historical agreement. Both cultures looked at the exact same patch of mud and cedars and essentially said, something dark lives in there, keep out.
Exactly.
But that wariness wasn't just metaphysical. It became horrifyingly physical during one of the most devastating conflicts in early American history, which is King Philip's War.
Yes, this is a crucial turning point for the land.
From 1675 to 1676, the Wampanoag Nation, under the leadership of a chief named Metacomet, who the English called King Philip, went to war against the Plymouth colony. And this conflict was absolute butchery.
It was devastating.
The swamp itself served as a central stronghold and a tactical retreat for the Wampanoag. The blood spilled in and around this specific area was just staggering.
Proportional to the population at the time, King Philip's War remains one of the deadliest conflicts on American soil. It wasn't merely a series of battles. I mean, it was a desperate struggle for survival that culminated in the near-total destruction of the Wampanoag as an independent political entity in the region.
The scale of the loss is hard to comprehend.
And the betrayal and violence were absolute. The conclusion of this war is essential to the theoretical framework of the triangle. Metacomet was eventually hunted down and killed. But the colonial forces did not simply execute an enemy combatant.
No, they made a horrific example out of him.
They drew and quartered his body, they severed his head, transported it to Plymouth, and displayed it on a pike in the center of town for 25 years.
25 years. Just think about the psychological weight of that.
Yeah.
The sheer vindictive brutality inflicted on a people whose connection to the land was the core of their entire existence.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the theoretical framework researchers apply here. Because I want you to think of the landscape like an old magnetic VHS tape. Usually, daily human life is just a weak, static signal, right? It doesn't leave a lasting mark on the tape.
That makes sense.
But King Philip's War, with its absolute betrayal, mass slaughter, and cultural annihilation, was a massive electromagnetic spike. Did it overwrite whatever baseline spiritual energy was naturally occurring in the swamp, permanently magnetizing the bedrock with the horror of that specific event?
It's a compelling theory.
I love the poetry of that idea, but I have to play the skeptic here for a minute. Are we genuinely proposing a biological or geological mechanism where mud and granite can record human trauma? Because metaphorically, sure.
Right.
But literally, how could a landscape possibly remember a war?
Well, the mechanism of environmental memory is actually one of the most contentious debates in anomaly research. The scientific skepticism you're bringing up is entirely valid. Dirt does not have a nervous system, right? Granite does not experience grief.
No.
However, the data we are confronted with is 350 years of continuous, escalating high strangeness directly correlated to this specific geographical boundary. So we have to consider the place memory theory, which is sometimes called the stone tape theory.
Okay, break that down for us.
It posits that extreme emotional energy, terror, rage, sudden death can alter the localized quantum environment. If the Wampanoag were correct that the Hockomock Swamp was already a place of amplified energy, the atrocities of the war may have acted as a catalyst.
Like a spark hitting gasoline.
Precisely. It may have fractured whatever natural containment existed. Whether you view it as a literal recording or a metaphysical shattering of the landscape, the historical data point remains. A catastrophic trauma occurred, and the land has behaved erratically ever since.
So the war wasn't just fought on the stage, the war broke the stage.
That's a great way to put it.
And if the stage is broken, Hockomock Swamp is the epicenter of the fracture. We've established the horrific historical context, so let's physically push our way through the brush and into the center of the Bridgewater Triangle. Let's talk about the physical, sensory reality of being inside 16,000 acres of Devil's Swamp.
To enter Hockomock is to subject yourself to severe sensory deprivation and geographical disorientation. It's an overwhelming environment.
Sounds like a nightmare.
The tree canopy in many areas is dense enough to completely block out the sun, throwing the undergrowth into a state of perpetual twilight, even at noon. And the ground is treacherous. It's a mix of deep muck, submerged roots, and deceptive waterways. Casual hikers do not accidentally wander through Hockomock.
No, it's a fortress.
Exactly. It's designed to keep you out.
And the source text highlights something I find deeply unsettling. It's not just the mud that keeps people out, it's the atmosphere. Almost everyone who spends any significant amount of time in the deep parts of Hockomock Swamp reports an identical physiological reaction.
The dread.
Yes, a pervasive, heavy sensation of being watched. And not the feeling of like a coyote or a deer tracking you from a distance. The witnesses specifically describe the feeling of being observed by something that possesses absolute authority over the environment.
Right, the apex predator feeling.
And absolutely zero fear of the human trespassing in it. And that feeling is really just the prelude to the visual phenomena, because the most frequent, reliable report out of the swamp is the lights.
The luminous phenomena, commonly referred to as spook lights or orbs. These reports really form the baseline pulse of the triangle's activity.
What do they look like?
Witnesses consistently describe perfect spheres of light. They vary in color. Often they're a stark, blinding white, occasionally a warm orange, and most disturbingly, a deep, pulsating red.
Red orbs just sound inherently malicious to me.
They certainly have that reputation. Now, what forces us to elevate these reports above mundane explanations like swamp gas, which is just the ignition of decaying organic matter, is their documented behavior.
Right, because swamp gas doesn't act like this.
Exactly. Swamp gas burns briefly and erratically. It flashes and it's gone. These spheres move with calculated intention. They weave through the dense, tangled cedar branches without colliding with them.
And it's their reaction to being seen that is terrifying to me. If you stop walking, they stop. If you shine a flashlight at them, they might extinguish, only to reappear 30 feet to your left.
They exhibit evasion.
Evasion and curiosity. And again, these are not amateur ghost hunters getting spooked by fireflies. These are experienced hunters who have spent their entire lives navigating wetlands.
Yes, the credibility of the witnesses is key.
These are local police officers sent into the swamp on search and rescue missions who end up filing reports about intelligent, floating plasma balls matching their pace from the tree line. But as unnerving as an intelligent glowing orb is, it is nothing compared to flesh and blood terror.
No, it's huge escalation.
The 1970s brought a wave of something far more massive to Hockomock. We're talking about Bigfoot.
The cryptid reports from the Bridgewater Triangle add an entirely different dimension to the anomaly. We are transitioning from ethereal lights to immense physical force.
Again, property damage.
Exactly. In the 1970s, the surrounding agricultural communities experienced a violent intrusion. Residents reported an enormous bipedal, hair-covered creature emerging from the swamp boundaries.
But this isn't Harry and the Hendersons.
No, not at all. Unlike the passive, elusive Bigfoot typical of Pacific Northwest lore, this entity was destructive. The primary account describes the creature going haywire. It systematically attacked local farms, brutally slaughtering livestock. Pigs and sheep were found killed, seemingly not for sustenance, but simply destroyed.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. A slaughtered pig is a massive piece of physical evidence. We aren't talking about a blurry footprint in the mud. We are talking about hundreds of pounds of dead livestock and panicked farmers.
Right, you can't ignore a dead pig.
The local authorities didn't treat this like a joke. The Massachusetts state and local police mobilized a massive, coordinated search operation. They brought in specialized canine units, highly trained attack and tracking dogs, and swept the swamp for 2 full days.
A massive tactical response.
They had the perimeter locked down, they had a fresh scent of blood, and an animal that allegedly weighed over 600 pounds.
And the result of that massive tactical sweep was an absolute void.
Which makes no sense.
None. The canine units failed to pick up any biological trail. A creature of that size, having just engaged in violent physical exertion, leaves behind a massive biological signature. Sweat, hair, crushed foliage, blood. For trained tracking dogs to find nothing is a critical failure of biological expectation.
So what does this all mean? I really want to push on this. If you have a dog specifically bred and trained to track a biological organism, and that dog finds zero trace of a monster that just tore a pig apart 20 minutes ago, we are left with 2 impossible options.
Okay, let's hear them.
Option A. We are dealing with an undiscovered primate that has evolved an anti-tracking cloaking ability that defies the laws of nature. Or option B. We are dealing with something that slaughtered the sheep, stepped back across the border of Hockomock Swamp, and literally ceased to exist as physical matter.
Option B is where researchers are forced to look. What's fascinating here is the absolute collision between mundane reality and ontological shock. The dead sheep are a stark, undeniable reality.
Right.
The police dogs are a reality, yet the perpetrator operates outside the constraints of our physical laws. It enters our reality, causes physical devastation, and then seemingly retracts from the board entirely.
Like it just unplugs from the matrix.
Exactly, and this blatant disregard for biological possibility is not confined to the ground. It extends into the sky above the canopy.
Which brings us back to the Norton police sergeant. We touched on this in the opening hook, but we really need to dive into it because it's the ultimate test of witness credibility.
Yeah.
A trained, active-duty law enforcement officer filed a report that a giant prehistoric bird flew over the swamp.
In broad daylight.
He specifically stated it possessed a wingspan of 12 feet and looked exactly like a pterodactyl. It wasn't a trick of the moonlight. It was broad daylight.
The psychology behind an official report of this nature is a vital data point. Law enforcement culture is deeply pragmatic. An officer's career relies entirely on their reliability as an observer.
Yeah, you don't want to be the crazy cop.
To put a pterodactyl sighting on official police letterhead is an act of professional self-sabotage. It invites immediate ridicule, psychological evaluations, and jeopardizes their standing. Therefore, the internal compulsion to report it must have been overwhelming.
He couldn't unsee it.
The visual reality of the encounter in that moment had to be so undeniable, so sharply detailed, that it bypassed all of the officer's self-preservation instincts. The creature could not be reasoned away as a blue heron or a large eagle.
You don't risk your pension unless you are absolutely, unavoidably certain of what you just saw. So we have intentional plasma orbs, a Bigfoot that can evaporate, and Jurassic Park extras flying over the trees. This is where my brain starts to short circuit.
It's a lot to process.
Because we haven't even looked up at the night sky yet. The deep woods are full of cryptids, but the atmosphere above the Bridgewater Triangle is dominated by something else entirely. Let's shift our focus upward to the UFO wave.
The aerial anomalies recorded over the triangle are staggering, both in their frequency and their structural variety. We are not discussing ambiguous, distant flashes of light that could be dismissed as satellites or meteorites.
No, these are up close and personal.
We are analyzing systematic, close proximity encounters with massive, structured craft.
The 1970s were the golden age for this area. It was actually the massive concentration of UFO reports during this decade that drew the attention of cryptozoologist Loren Coleman. He took a map, started dropping pins on every credible sighting, the Bigfoot attacks, the Thunderbirds, the UFOs, and realized they were all crammed into this exact same 200-square-mile zone.
He connected the dots.
Literally, he drew the lines connecting Abington, Freetown, and Rehoboth, and coined the name the Bridgewater Triangle. And the UFO sightings he was charting were intense. People described massive, metallic geometric craft moving at extremely low altitudes, completely silently directly over populated residential areas.
However, the historical record proves the 70s were merely a flare-up of an ongoing underlying condition. The source material draws attention to accounts from 1942.
1942, wow.
This timeline is critical because it predates the seminal Kenneth Arnold flying saucer sighting of 1947, which birthed the modern UFO craze. So in 1942, residents around the triangle reported objects descending from the sky that they labeled shootists.
Shootists. It sounds like old military slang. They described these objects slowly drifting downward, mimicking the descent rate of a paratrooper hanging from a parachute.
Right.
But the terrifying detail is that before these shootists ever reached the tree line, they would simply vanish. No impact, no wreckage, just blinking out of existence in midair.
The shootist phenomenon perfectly encapsulates the surreal mechanics of the triangle. But as you mentioned earlier, this sheer variety creates a significant analytical problem.
Exactly. I am struggling with the sheer variety here. I can accept ghosts, or I can accept UFOs if we look at them in a vacuum.
Sure.
But having a teleporting Bigfoot, a prehistoric Thunderbird, and a silent, structured metallic UFO all operating within a few miles of each other entirely breaks the internal logic of the paranormal. It feels like someone took 3 different sci-fi scripts, threw them in a blender, and poured them over Massachusetts.
It's chaotic.
How do researchers not just throw their hands up in frustration and say the data is contaminated?
Well, they don't throw their hands up. They change the paradigm. When the data fundamentally breaks the existing framework, you must build a new framework. This precise contradiction is what led researchers, notably John Keel and others, to develop the window area theory.
Also referred to as a thin place.
Yeah, exactly.
I love this concept. Think of the 200 square miles of the Bridgewater Triangle like a broken radio receiver. Imagine the tuning dial is physically jammed directly between three different stations.
That's a good visual.
The radio isn't broken because it's playing noise. It's flawlessly catching the frequency of a true crime station, a sci-fi station, and a nature documentary, all at the exact same time, blasting them simultaneously through the same speaker. The sheer diversity of the weirdness isn't a reason to doubt the evidence. The diversity is the evidence. The environment itself is the anomaly.
That is a remarkably precise analogy. In the context of a window area, researchers propose that the geographical boundary between our baseline reality and adjacent dimensions, whatever they may be, is functionally compromised.
So the walls are just thin.
In this model, you no longer have to reconcile the biological evolution of a Bigfoot with the aerospace engineering of a UFO. They aren't native to the swamp. They are transient visitors.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
The UFOs, the cryptids, the entities, they're all just traffic from entirely different origins, pouring through the same open, localized tear in the fabric of space-time.
But if the triangle is a compromised border, a broken window, there is one specific entity that seems to be sitting right on the windowsill, something that has been recognized and documented by the locals long before the first metallic saucer was ever reported in the sky.
The native resident, so to speak?
Right. If we were looking for the original native architect of the madness here, we have to talk about the Pukwudgie.
The Pukwudgie is arguably the most critical piece of the Bridgewater puzzle because it bridges ancient anthropology with contemporary witness testimony. If we consult the Wampanoag oral traditions, the Pukwudgie is explicitly defined.
They aren't just vague spirits.
Not at all. They are described as small humanoid figures, generally standing 2 to 3 feet in height. Their physical characteristics include smooth gray skin, enlarged, pronounced ears, and hands that terminate in sharp claws.
And their personality profile is not exactly Disney. The Wampanoag folklore makes it abundantly clear that Pukwudgies are malevolent. They embody the archetype of the deadly trickster.
They are very dangerous.
They possess the ability to create incredibly vivid illusions, appearing and disappearing at will. Their primary motivation seems to be disorientation. They specifically target travelers, luring them off established, safe paths, leading them deep into the woods, and often directly into fatal danger.
And there's one specific geological feature in the triangle where their activity is incredibly concentrated: Assinet Ledge.
Assinet Ledge is a sheer, imposing cliff face located within the Freetown State Forest section of the triangle. Historically, it possesses a deeply troubling statistical anomaly regarding fatalities.
It's a dark place.
An inordinate number of people who venture to the ledge end up falling to their deaths, or seemingly jumping without any prior indication of suicidal ideation.
And that compulsion is terrifyingly active. A highly respected paranormal investigator named John Brightman documented a harrowing experience there. He was investigating the ledge, standing near the drop, when he reported hearing a distinct, disembodied voice commanding him with an impossible choice.
What'd I say?
The voice simply told him to jump or leave.
He, thankfully, chose to leave. But this immediately raises a psychological red flag for me. We know about the call of the void, right? The high place phenomenon.
Sure, the sudden urge to jump.
Exactly. It's a documented quirk of the human brain, where standing near a lethal drop triggers a sudden intrusive thought about jumping. Is it possible that the imposing, dangerous geography of Assinet Ledge naturally triggers this intense psychological phenomenon, and over hundreds of years, the local culture simply personified that terrifying biological urge into the mythology of a gray, clawed trickster?
You are outlining the exact boundary between cultural anthropology and paranormal reality. The psychological projection theory that the Pukwudgie is simply a metaphor for the natural dangers of the forest is the standard academic consensus.
Right, that's the safe answer.
However, this raises an important question. What happens when modern data directly contradicts the metaphor? What forces investigators to abandon the psychological theory and consider physical manifestation are the contemporary encounters.
People are still seeing them.
We have a steady stream of modern hikers, campers, and hunters emerging from the woods reporting direct physical encounters with 2 to 3 foot tall humanoids with gray skin.
And this is the detail that shatters the skeptical argument for me. The independent verification. If you read a spooky book about a gray goblin and then go camping, every shadow looks like a gray goblin. That is textbook confirmation bias.
Yes, the mind plays tricks.
But the modern witnesses reporting these creatures frequently have absolutely zero prior knowledge of ancient Native American folklore. They have never heard the word Pukwudgie. They go for a hike, experience something terrifying, and file a report describing a creature that perfectly, anatomically matches a 1,000-year-old oral tradition. You cannot psychologically project a specific monster you don't even know exists.
Exactly the point. When uniformed, independent observers generate data that perfectly aligns with highly specific, localized folklore, the phenomenon demands rigorous scientific attention. It suggests that the Wampanoag were not creating a metaphorical fable to keep children away from cliffs.
No, it was a warning.
They were providing a literal taxonomic description of an entity that shares the environment.
And if an ancient trickster sharing the woods is unnerving, we need to brace ourselves. Because we are moving from the mythological dangers of the cliffs into the absolute, documented horrors of human depravity.
The human element is often the darkest part.
If Freetown State Forest shows us how wild, unpaved land acts as a sponge for the supernatural, it also acts as a magnet for the darkest impulses of humanity. The phenomena in the southern anchor of the triangle aren't just spooky, they are actively, aggressively evil. Let's examine the darkness of Freetown State Forest.
Freetown State Forest encompasses roughly 5,000 acres of dense woodland. Statistically and anecdotally, it is widely considered the most hostile sector within the Bridgewater Triangle. It is a focal point for every category of anomaly we have discussed thus far: cryptid sightings, luminescent orbs, and distinct shadow entities.
But there's a difference here.
Yes. What isolates Freetown State Forest from Hockomock Swamp is its grim, highly documented history of severe human criminality.
This is where the police reports shift from tracking Bigfoot to tracking cults. And I want to be extremely careful and objective here. We aren't talking about internet rumors. Starting in the 1970s, extending through the heights of the Satanic panic of the 80s and bleeding into the 90s, Freetown State Forest was an active investigation zone for the Fall River Police Department.
They found a lot of physical evidence.
They were documenting highly specific, ritualistic animal mutilations. We are talking about livestock cattle, horses, as well as domestic animals found slaughtered in the woods. These animals were not preyed upon by coyotes. They were killed with surgical precision, displaying injuries entirely consistent with ritual sacrifice.
To understand the gravity, we must look at the chronological and geographical overlap with human tragedy. During this exact same era, the late 70s and early 80s, the city of Fall River, which borders the forest, was the epicenter of a series of horrific, cult-related homicides.
Very real, very prosecuted crimes.
Yes, these were factual, prosecuted crimes where young individuals were murdered by perpetrators associated with occult belief systems. The fact that these individuals were utilizing the forest, the very epicenter of the Triangle's paranormal activity, as a staging ground and a sanctuary for their rituals cannot be overlooked.
The overlap is sickening. And deep inside that specific forest, there was a focal point that researchers and locals refer to as the spirit tree.
That place is notorious.
It is a massive, ancient tree that has become a dark shrine. Over the decades, people have carved intricate, disturbing faces into its bark and left bizarre ritualistic offerings at its base. Investigators who approach the spirit tree consistently report a sudden, drastic shift in atmospheric pressure.
Like the air gets heavy.
A feeling of the air becoming physically heavy, accompanied by a profound sense of malevolent observation. The area surrounding the tree is also a hotspot for photographic anomalies. Brilliant, structured orbs of light captured on film that weren't visible to the naked eye, and reports of distinct, three-dimensional shadow figures detaching from the darkness and moving between the trunks.
This specific concentration of human atrocity and paranormal anomaly creates a profound analytical feedback loop. We are presented with a chicken and egg scenario regarding localized evil.
Which came first, right?
Does the inherently anomalous, psychically volatile nature of Freetown State Forest act as a beacon, subtly attracting individuals whose psychologies are already primed for terrible violence?
Drawing them in.
Or is it the reverse? Do the horrific, ritualistic crimes committed by humans in those woods fundamentally stain the environment, generating the shadow figures, the extreme atmospheric pressure, and the pervasive dread as a form of metaphysical scar tissue?
Metaphysical scar tissue. That feedback loop is terrifying. Does the land attract the evil, or does the evil poison the land? It's like a notoriously dangerous neighborhood, but operating on a metaphysical frequency.
That's an apt comparison.
If a physical location gets a reputation for being dark, abandoned, and lawless, it acts as a magnet for criminals who want to hide their actions in the shadows of those derelict buildings. Freetown State Forest operates as the spiritual equivalent. The land provides the isolation, and the human beings bring the true horror. And once the blood is spilled, the horror just permanently seeps into the soil.
The concept of metaphysical scar tissue is crucial as we move forward, because it forces us to ask what happens when we attempt to domesticate a location that is actively bleeding this kind of energy.
Yes, that brings us perfectly to our next major question. We've spent all our time in the deep swamps and the wild state forests. We've looked at what happens when the thin place is left to nature. But what happens when human infrastructure meets the anomaly?
The rules change.
What happens when you decide to pour asphalt and lay concrete foundations directly on top of a broken reality?
The manifestation of the phenomena undergoes a dramatic shift. When human architecture and infrastructure intersect with the triangle's core energy, the paranormal accounts tend to become heavily structured, intensely repetitive, and significantly more interactive.
Like they learn our patterns.
The anomaly adapts to the human environment. The most prominent example of this adaptation is Route 44.
Route 44 is an absolute legend in New England folklore. It's the major highway cutting directly east to west right through the very heart of the Bridgewater Triangle, connecting Rehoboth to the coast. And this stretch of asphalt has a very specific, permanent resident, the red-headed hitchhiker.
A very well-documented entity.
Now, this is not an amorphous ball of light or a fleeting shadow in the woods. Witnesses across decades provide an eerily uniform description. They see a man, solid and distinct, with long red hair and a full beard, wearing completely mundane clothing, usually plaid flannel or lumberjack-style shirt. He stands on the shoulder of the highway, thumb out, looking for a ride.
The sheer consistency of the red-headed hitchhiker elevates it from a local urban legend to a highly structured paranormal event. For over 50 years, entirely independent motorists, separated by generations, have reported the exact same visual data.
And it's not just a passing glance.
No, it is the nature of the interaction that confirms its anomalous status. The entity exhibits multiple levels of engagement. Some drivers attempt to pull over to offer assistance, and the figure simply blinks out of existence before the vehicle can come to a halt.
Okay, spooky, but standard ghost behavior.
In more intimate encounters, drivers report successfully pulling over, the figure entering the vehicle, riding in the passenger seat for a mile or two, and then dematerializing while the car is traveling at highway speeds.
And then there is the third type of encounter, which is absolute nightmare fuel. Some drivers are traveling too fast to stop, or they feel uneasy and decide to speed past him. As they approach, the hitchhiker deliberately steps off the shoulder and directly into the path of the speeding car.
A terrifying experience.
The driver slams on the brakes, braces for a horrific, fatal impact, and the car passes completely physically through the man. There is no thud, no shattered windshield, no blood. The driver pulls over, trembling, looks back, and the road is entirely empty. Now, I have to challenge this. We are talking about a dark highway with a spooky reputation. If people know they are driving on haunted Route 44, aren't their brains just primed for fear? A shadow from a passing street lamp or a deer on the shoulder gets instantly misinterpreted as a ghost because of confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias is the first filter we apply. If drivers only reported a scary shape, we could dismiss it as pareidolia or headlight distortion. But confirmation bias cannot account for the high-definition uniformity of the descriptions from uninformed drivers.
That's true.
A street lamp shadow does not selectively project a red beard and a plaid flannel shirt for 50 continuous years. Furthermore, researchers have exhausted historical records attempting to identify a matching victim.
Like a guy who died on the road.
Exactly. A red-haired man who died tragically on that stretch of road. No such historical record exists. The entity appears to be an archetype, a projection generated by the environment itself, utilizing the language of the highway, a hitchhiker.
That is deeply unsettling. The environment is projecting an archetype. Now, I want to contrast that highly visual projection with another massive piece of human infrastructure located at the northeastern edge of the triangle, Taunton State Hospital.
A very different type of energy.
This is a sprawling, imposing, Victorian-era psychiatric institution. And like many asylums built in the 19th century, its primary function was the containment of human suffering. The medical treatments and living conditions during its early decades were, frankly, horrific.
The concentration of psychological and physical agony within the walls of Taunton State Hospital over a century represents a massive accumulation of negative energy. And disturbingly, it shares a sociological connection with Freetown State Forest.
The cult activity.
Yes. During the 1960s and 70s, specific abandoned sectors of the hospital were infiltrated and allegedly used for occult rituals. Local law enforcement investigations recovered physical evidence of these activities, ritualistic symbols painted on walls and remnants of ceremonies conducted within the bowels of the institution.
The darkness layered on top of darkness. But what fascinates me is how the haunting of Taunton State Hospital manifests. It is completely different from the hitchhiker on Route 44.
The presentation changes based on the location.
When the hospital was still partially accessible, visitors and staff didn't report seeing a clear visual apparition of a patient. They didn't see a guy in a hospital gown. Instead, the phenomena were violently tactile. People walking down specific corridors consistently reported the physical sensation of being grabbed.
Physical contact is rare.
They felt their clothing being sharply yanked, or the distinct, undeniable pressure of unseen, heavy hands wrapping around their ankles or shoulders.
This dichotomy is brilliant and cuts to the core of how environmental anomalies operate. We must analyze why one location produces a visual ghost, while another produces a tactile assault. The hypothesis is that the fundamental nature and history of the container dictate the manifestation of the energy.
So Route 44 dictates the visual ghost.
Route 44 is an environment of rapid transit. Drivers are visually scanning, moving at 60 miles per hour. The most efficient way for an anomaly to interface with human consciousness in that environment is a high-contrast visual projection, a figure on the roadside.
Right. But a psychiatric hospital is the exact opposite of transit. It is an environment defined entirely by confinement, physical restriction, and bodily loss of control. So the metaphysical energy trapped in that building doesn't show you a picture. It forces you to experience the history of the building.
It makes you feel the confinement.
It manifests as physical restraint. Unseen hands grabbing you in the dark. The energy adapts perfectly to the container it was poured into.
Exactly. The phenomena are not random. They are deeply context-dependent. The triangle utilizes the psychological and physical vocabulary of the specific location to communicate its presence.
So we have all the puzzle pieces scattered across the table. We've examined the ancient Wampanoag warnings, the historical bloodbath of King Philip's War, 16,000 acres of impenetrable orb-filled swamp. We've got evaporating Bigfoot, broad daylight pterodactyls, teleporting UFOs, Pukwudgies commanding people to jump from cliffs, satanic cults drawn to cursed forests, a projected lumberjack on the highway, and unseen hands grabbing ankles in a Victorian asylum.
It's an overwhelming amount of data.
The sheer weight of this data is crushing. So what does this all mean? How do the researchers, the people who have dedicated 50 years of their lives to mapping this madness, attempt to make sense of the Bridgewater Triangle?
The scientific and paranormal communities generally attempt to organize this chaos through three primary explanatory frameworks. The first, and the most grounded in conventional science, is the geological theory.
Okay, let's start with the hard science.
This framework bypasses folklore and focuses entirely on the unique subterranean composition of the triangle. The entire 200-square-mile zone sits atop a highly specific matrix of underground water systems, massive granite formations, and, most crucially, exceptionally high concentrations of crystalline quartz in the bedrock.
And this is where we get into the piezoelectric effect, which is hard science. Quartz crystals are fascinating because they possess a unique property. When they are subjected to immense geological stress, like tectonic strain or shifting bedrock, they literally generate electrical charge. They produce localized electromagnetic fields.
Proponents of the geological theory argue that the Bridgewater Triangle is essentially a massive naturally occurring electromagnetic generator. This theory attempts to explain the phenomena in two distinct ways.
What's the first?
First, the physical release of this tectonic energy could ionize the surrounding air, creating glowing spheres of plasma. This neatly explains the intelligent-seeming orbs of light in Hockomock Swamp. They are Earthlights, a known, albeit poorly understood, geophysical phenomenon.
Okay, that covers the orbs.
Secondly, and more importantly, strong, fluctuating electromagnetic fields have a profound, documented impact on the human brain.
Right. This connects directly to the work of Dr. Michael Persinger and his God helmet experiments. He demonstrated that if you stimulate the human temporal lobe with specific weak magnetic fields, you can artificially induce profound hallucinations. Subjects report the sudden, terrifying sensation of a sensed presence in the room, extreme paranoia, and even visual and auditory hallucinations.
Yes, the neurological impact is well documented.
So the theory is that hikers in the swamp are just walking into a massive invisible magnetic field that fries their temporal lobe and makes them hallucinate a monster.
Precisely. The geological theory suggests the triangle is essentially a naturally occurring God helmet. The environment alters the perception of the observer, rendering the ghosts, cryptids, and UFOs as nothing more than geographically induced neurological misfirings.
Okay, I can buy that a sudden spike in electromagnetism might give a hiker a massive migraine, an overwhelming feeling of dread, or even cause them to hallucinate a shadow person in their peripheral vision. I think the God helmet theory beautifully explains the atmospheric dread of the swamp.
It's very compelling for the psychological effects.
But I have to push back hard on this as a unifying theory. An electromagnetic field in a hiker's brain does not carve intricate, ritualistic faces into the bark of the spirit tree. A localized plasma anomaly does not slaughter a farmer's sheep, tear them apart, and successfully hide the scent from a team of trained police canines. And temporal lobe stimulation certainly does not project a red-headed man in a flannel shirt into the minds of thousands of independent drivers over 50 years. The geology might build a theater, but it utterly fails to explain the actors on the stage.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, your criticism is exactly why the geological theory is considered incomplete. It accounts for the lights and the atmospheric pressure, but it collapses under the weight of the physical interactions. A quartz crystal cannot generate a 12-foot biological Thunderbird witnessed by a sober police officer.
It just doesn't hold up.
Because the hard science falls short, researchers are forced into the second major framework, the interdimensional portal theory.
We touched on this with the thin place metaphor earlier. This theory completely abandons the safety of conventional physics. It suggests that the Bridgewater Triangle is a literal geographical tear in the fabric of space-time, a localized zone where the dimensional boundaries separating our baseline reality from adjacent parallel realities has worn dangerously thin or ruptured entirely.
In the interdimensional framework, the absurd variety of the phenomena is the primary supporting evidence. You no longer need to explain how a hominid cryptid and an aerospace anomaly co-evolved in a Massachusetts swamp.
Because they didn't.
They didn't. The Bigfoot is not an undiscovered ape hiding in the cedars. It is a transient biological entity that wandered through an open door from an adjacent space, caused havoc, and wandered back out. The UFOs are not flying light years across the galaxy. They are simply sliding laterally through the dimensional permeability of the triangle. It provides a unified theory for the chaos.
It is entirely mind-bending, but structurally it's the only theory that accommodates the sheer chaotic variety of the data. However, we cannot ignore the third major theory, which ironically brings us full circle, right back to the very beginning of our deep dive, the ancestral land theory.
The oldest theory we have.
This framework discards modern physics and interdimensional sci-fi entirely and simply reiterates the Wampanoag understanding of the land.
The ancestral land theory posits that the Wampanoag categorization of Hockomock as a place of volatile spiritual energy was not a primitive superstition, but an accurate, functional understanding of the local ecology. They understood the parameters of the energy, respected its boundaries, and successfully managed their coexistence with it.
But then the war happened.
However, the sheer brutality and trauma of King Philip's War, the betrayal, the slaughter, the desecration of Metacomet, permanently break that spiritual management.
It suggests the triangle isn't just haunted by the ghosts of the past. It suggests the land itself is an active, living participant that has been fundamentally traumatized. The Wampanoag knew how to live with Hockomock, we do not. We paved over a volatile spiritual battery, and now the land is lashing out at an infrastructure that refuses to acknowledge its power.
It's a powerful way to look at it.
And honestly, after weighing the geology, the portals, and the ancestral trauma, the most telling conclusion comes from the man who started it all. Loren Coleman, the cryptozoologist who mapped the triangle and has studied it comprehensively for half a century.
Coleman's ultimate conclusion is perhaps the most profound aspect of the entire Bridgewater Triangle phenomenon. After 50 years of rigorous charting, interviewing witnesses, and analyzing the overlap of UFOs, cryptids, and human evil, what is his grand unifying theory? He doesn't have one.
That is incredible. 50 years, and he throws his hands up.
He acknowledges the limits of our current paradigms. His only definitive conclusion is that the anomaly is objectively real. Something fundamentally incomprehensible is occurring within those 200 square miles. It was happening long before we arrived, it is happening now, and it shows absolutely no signs of stopping.
He just accepts the mystery.
He followed the evidence, and the evidence simply confirms the existence of the mystery without offering the comfort of a solution.
That lack of an answer is honestly more chilling than if he had handed us a neat, peer-reviewed scientific paper explaining it all away. Just a stark warning. The fire is real, it's burning right now, good luck.
Right, it's out of our control.
So let's bring all of this massive complexity back to you, the listener. We have just navigated 200 square miles, possessing the most staggering density of high strangeness on planet Earth. We explored ancient Wampanoag warnings, the impenetrable darkness of Hockomock Swamp, intelligent orbs, impossible creatures vanishing from tracking dogs,
Pterodactyls in the daylight.
UFOs dropping invisible paratroopers, Pukwudgies guarding sheer cliffs, the human evil drawn to Freetown State Forest, the projected hitchhiker of Route 44, and the unseen grasping hands of Taunton State Hospital. 50 years of modern, rigorous investigation hasn't provided a single concrete answer, but it has irrefutably, undeniably proven that the Bridgewater Triangle is awake and highly active.
And that enduring mystery is precisely why the Bridgewater Triangle demands our attention. It serves as a profound geographical monument to the limits of human understanding. We live in a highly technological era where we operate under the arrogant assumption that we have the world entirely mapped, categorized, and mathematically conquered by science.
We like to think we know everything.
But locations like the Hockomock Swamp exist to violently remind us that our grasp on reality is fragile. The universe is far more porous, infinitely more complex, and deeply more mysterious than our modern sensibilities allow us to comfortably admit.
It is the ultimate humbling thought. We think we hold all the answers, but there are 200 square miles in Massachusetts, proving we might barely understand the questions. We might know absolutely nothing about how the fabric of reality actually functions.
And that leaves me with one final lingering thought for you to carry with you today.
What's that?
We lean heavily into the ancestral land theory. The concept that the profound historical trauma and the staggering human violence of King Philip's War was severe enough to permanently shatter the metaphysical boundary of the Massachusetts landscape 350 years ago. If extreme human atrocity truly possesses the power to break the fabric of reality in a physical location, look at the world right now.
It's a terrifying thought.
What current catastrophic human events happening on the globe today are actively tearing that fabric as we speak, quietly forging the impenetrable, haunted Bridgewater triangles of tomorrow. Something to think about.
Until next time.